My people, if you think Lagos traffic is confusing, wait until you hear this one. Imagine a rainy night, thunder shouting like he wants to arrest somebody, nurses running up and down like it's Black Friday sales, one baby crying like he just paid NEPA bill, another baby shining with gold bracelet like he came straight from Banana Island, and somewhere in that chaos, something happened that will make even DNA say, wait first, what is going on here? Just sit down, don't blink, because this story, it did not come to play. Welcome to AfroTales TV, your home for rich, exciting, and inspiring stories from around the world. Today's story will touch your heart and keep you hooked till the very end. If you are new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our amazing stories.
The rain started in the evening and did not stop. It fell heavily on the roofs of houses in Surulere, Lagos. The roads were flooded. Cars moved slowly through the water. Thunder roared in the sky and lightning flashed again and again. Inside a government hospital in Surulere, the corridors were crowded. Nurses rushed from one ward to another. Some patients were lying on benches because there were not enough beds. The hospital was noisy and disorganized because many people came in late due to the rain. In one small ward, a 19-year-old girl named Emily Johnson lay on a narrow hospital bed. She was sweating and crying. Her hair was messy from pain. She held the edge of the bed tightly as another contraction came. She had come to the hospital alone in a taxi. There was no family member beside her. There was no man holding her hand. The father of her baby had denied the pregnancy and stopped answering her calls months ago. When she told her parents she was pregnant, they shouted at her and sent her away. Since then, she had been living in a small room in Ajigun, managing to survive by doing small jobs. "Push!" the nurse shouted. Emily screamed and pushed with all her strength. After some minutes that felt like hours, a baby's cry filled the room. It was a baby boy. The nurse lifted him up briefly before taking him to clean him. Emily turned her head weakly. "Is he okay?" she asked in a low voice. "He is fine," the nurse replied quickly before walking away. Tears rolled down Emily's face. She should have felt happy. She should have felt proud. But fear filled her heart instead of joy. She thought about how she would feed him. She thought about school fees in the future. She thought about insults from neighbors who already looked at her with shame. She felt alone and helpless. In another larger ward down the corridor, a different atmosphere filled the room. Victoria Williams, 28, lay on a clean hospital bed. Her husband, Daniel Williams, stood beside her, holding her hand. He wore expensive clothes even in the hospital. His shoes shone under the bright light. Victoria had also just given birth to a baby boy. After years of trying for a child, after visiting doctors and attending many church services across Lagos, their prayer had finally been answered. Victoria held her baby carefully. Her face glowed with happiness even though she was tired. Daniel kissed her forehead. "God has done it," he said softly. Their baby boy cried loudly and strongly. Daniel smiled proudly. He had already bought a small gold bracelet from Dubai for his son. He gently placed it on the baby's tiny wrist before the nurse carried him away to clean him. The rain continued to fall heavily outside. Because of the weather, the hospital staff were overwhelmed. Some nurses were new, some were tired from long shifts. Babies were being born one after another that night. After cleaning, the babies were taken to the nursery room. It was a small room with 4 baby beds placed side by side. Each baby had a tag with the mother's name written on it. Emily slowly got out of bed. Her legs were weak, but her heart was restless. She wanted to see her baby again. She walked quietly toward the nursery. No one stopped her. Many nurses were busy attending to other patients. She stood by the glass window and looked inside. 4 baby boys were lying there, wrapped in white cloth. They looked peaceful and innocent. Emily searched carefully for her son. Then she saw him. He looked small and fragile. Next to him lay another baby with smooth skin and a tiny gold bracelet shining under the light. The tag on that baby's bed read Williams. Emily's eyes stayed on the bracelet. She remembered the way Daniel looked rich and confident. She remembered Victoria's happy smile. She imagined the house they would return to in Leki. She imagined big rooms, good schools, and plenty of food. Then she thought about her own life in Ajigun, a leak in roof, one small room, hunger, struggle. Her heart began to beat very fast. "If my son grows up with me, he will suffer," she whispered to herself. Thunder sounded loudly outside. The lights in the hospital flickered for a second. Emily looked around. The nurse inside the nursery had stepped out to answer a call. No one was watching. Her hand started shaking. Her mind was confused. She knew what she was thinking was wrong, very wrong, but fear spoke louder than her conscience. "That baby will have everything," she thought. "Mine will have nothing." She quietly entered the nursery. The room smelt of baby powder and medicine. She walked slowly to the beds. She stared at her own baby one more time. Tears filled her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. With trembling hands, she removed the name tags from both babies. She switched them. She carefully removed the gold bracelet and placed it on her own baby's wrist. Then she placed the wrong tag on Victoria's baby. Her breathing became heavy. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. She quickly stepped out of the nursery and returned to her bed before anyone noticed. Minutes later, the nurse returned and continued her duties, unaware that something terrible had just happened. The rain did not stop all night. Early the next morning, discharge papers were prepared. Daniel carried the baby with the gold bracelet proudly in his arms. Victoria smiled as they walked toward their car. They thanked the nurses and left the hospital happily, believing they were taking home their biological son. In another part of the hospital, Emily held the other baby tightly against her chest. She looked at his face and felt both relief and fear. She signed her discharge papers quietly and left the hospital alone in a small taxi. The rain had finally reduced to a light drizzle. Two families drove in different directions across Lagos. Each family believed they were complete, but they were wrong. A secret was born.
15 years passed in Lagos after that rainy night in Surulere. The city changed in many ways. New buildings rose in Leki. More people moved into Ajigun. Traffic became worse. Life became more expensive. But in two different parts of the city, two boys were growing up in two very different worlds. In Leki, inside a large white house with tall gates and security guards, Ethan Williams lived a life many children could only dream about. His bedroom was big and painted in soft blue. He had a comfortable bed, a study table, a laptop, and shelves full of books and toys. There was a swimming pool in the compound. There were cameras around the house. A driver took him to school every morning in a clean black SUV. Ethan attended a private international school in Victoria Island. His uniform was always neat. His shoes were polished. His classmates came from rich families. They talked about traveling to London and Dubai during holidays. Ethan had everything money could buy. Good food, expensive clothes, video games, and even a music tutor who came home twice a week. Victoria loved him deeply. She attended all his school events. She posted his pictures proudly. Daniel paid for the best teachers and the best doctors. They gave him the best life they could afford. But as Ethan grew older, something began to change inside him. When he looked at family pictures on the wall, he sometimes felt strange. His skin tone was darker than both Daniel and Victoria. His facial features were different. His hair texture was not the same as his father's. Sometimes, when relatives visited, they would stare at him a little too long. One day at a family gathering, an aunt whispered softly to another relative, "He does not look like Daniel." Ethan heard it. He pretended not to care, but the words stayed in his mind. As he entered his teenage years, he began to show anger. Small things made him upset. He argued with his parents more often. He sometimes locked himself in his room and refused to talk. Victoria thought it was just teenage behavior. Daniel believed he was being stubborn. But deep inside, Ethan felt like he did not fully belong. He could not explain the feeling. He loved his parents, but something felt different. Meanwhile, far away in Ajigun,
life was very different for Jaden Johnson. Jaden lived in a small one-room apartment with his mother, Emily. The roof sometimes leaked when it rained. The walls were old. The electricity was not steady. They shared a bathroom with other tenants in the compound. Emily worked very hard. She cooked food in the morning. In the afternoon, she washed clothes for neighbors. Some evenings, she sold sachet water by the roadside. Her hands were always tired. Her back often ached, but she never complained in front of Jaden. Jaden attended a public school not far from their house. The classrooms were crowded. Sometimes 3 students shared one desk. There were not enough textbooks, but Jaden loved to learn. He listened carefully to his teachers. He asked questions. He read borrowed books at night under a small rechargeable lamp when there was no electricity. From a young age, his teachers noticed something special about him. "This boy is very intelligent," one teacher said. "He understands things quickly." Jaden was calm and respectful. He did not fight with other boys. He helped his classmates with their homework. Even when they had little food at home, he did not complain. He often told his mother, "Don't worry, Mom. One day I will make you proud." People in the neighborhood sometimes looked at Jaden closely. "He does not look like Emily," a neighbor once said quietly. Jaden's skin was lighter. His facial structure was different. His behavior was also different from many children around him. He spoke politely and carried himself with quiet confidence. Emily heard the whispers many times. Each whisper felt like a sharp knife in her heart. Every day for 15 years, she lived with guilt. When she looked at Jaden's face, she sometimes saw Victoria's smile. When she watched him read his books with focus, she wondered what kind of life he would have lived in Leki. Sometimes at night, after Jaden had fallen asleep, Emily would sit quietly on the edge of the bed and cry. She remembered the rainy night in Surulere. She remembered her shaking hands. She remembered switching the tags. She tried to convince herself that she had done it for love. She told herself that she had saved her biological son from poverty, but the guilt never left her. In Leki, Victoria also sometimes felt confused when she looked at Ethan. She loved him deeply. She had raised him with care, but sometimes when she compared baby pictures, something felt strange. Maybe he just took after a distant relative, she would tell herself. Daniel refused to entertain any doubts. "He is my son," he would say firmly. As the boys turned 15, the whispers grew louder in both places. In Leki, relatives questioned quietly. In Ajigun, neighbors observed closely. 2 boys, 2 homes, 2 different worlds. One lived with comfort but carried silent confusion. The other lived with hardship but carried natural grace and intelligence. And in the middle of it all, Emily lived every single day with guilt. 15 years had passed, but for Emily Johnson, time did not wash away the memory of that rainy night in Surulere. Not one day went by without her remembering what she had done. Life in Ajigun was not easy, and it forced her to focus on survival. But guilt followed her everywhere like a shadow. Every morning, Emily woke up before sunrise. The compound was still quiet when she stepped outside with a small bucket to fetch water. She prepared food quickly so she could start her day. By 6 a.m., she was already by the roadside setting up her small food stand. She sold akara and pap to workers rushing to catch buses. Some days she made small profit. Some days she barely made enough to buy rice for dinner. By afternoon, she moved to another street where she washed clothes for families who could afford to pay her. She scrubbed and rinsed until her fingers became soft and wrinkled from soap and water. When she returned home in the evening, she still had to cook and clean. Sometimes she sold sachet water at night to make extra money. Her body was always tired. Her back hurt often, but she never complained loudly. She suffered quietly. Jaden helped her whenever he could. He fetched water, he ran small errands, he read his books seriously and promised her that one day their life would change. He was a good boy, respectful, calm, focused. But every time Emily looked at his face, her heart twisted. Jaden's eyes were shaped like Victoria's. His nose was not like hers. His skin tone was lighter than most people in her family. As he grew older, the resemblance became clearer in her mind. She had only seen Victoria properly once that night in the hospital, but the image never left her memory. Sometimes, when Jaden slept peacefully on the small bed they shared, Emily would sit quietly and stare at him. Tears would fill her eyes. She would whisper softly, "I did it for you. I did it to protect my son." She tried many times to convince herself she had done the right thing. "If I did not swap them, my real son would have grown up here in this poverty," she would think. "He would have suffered hunger. He would have struggled like me." She imagined her biological son living in a big house in Leki, eating good food, attending private school. She imagined him safe and comfortable. That thought gave her small comfort, but it never fully removed the pain. Sometimes fear would enter her heart. What if the truth came out? What if someone discovered what she had done? What if one day there was a mistake in hospital records? Whenever she heard news about DNA tests or baby swaps on television, her heart would beat very fast. She would quickly change the channel. She lived in constant quiet fear. Meanwhile, in Leki, Victoria Williams also had moments of silent confusion. Her house was large and beautiful. She did not worry about rent or food. She had helpers who cleaned and cooked. But peace was not always present in her heart. Sometimes she would sit in the living room and watch Ethan doing his homework. She loved him deeply. She had raised him from birth. She had carried him in her arms when he cried as a baby. She had stayed awake when he had fever. But as he grew older, she began to notice small differences. Ethan's skin tone was darker than both hers and Daniel's. His hair texture was different. His facial features did not strongly resemble anyone in Daniel's family. One afternoon, while looking through old family photo albums, Victoria placed Ethan's recent picture next to Daniel's childhood photo. She stared at both pictures quietly. Something felt strange. She shook her head immediately. "No, this is my son," she said softly to herself. But the thought did not completely go away. At family events, she sometimes caught relatives whispering. They tried to be quiet, but she noticed their looks. She heard small comments. "He looks different. Maybe he resembles a distant cousin." Each comment planted a small seed in her heart. One evening, Victoria finally shared her thoughts with Daniel. "Have you ever noticed that Ethan does not really look like us?" she asked carefully. Daniel frowned. "What are you saying?" he replied. "I am just saying, sometimes I feel something is strange," she said. Immediately, Daniel dismissed it. "Victoria, stop overthinking. Children do not always look exactly like their parents. He is our son. End of discussion." His voice was firm. Victoria nodded and did not continue the conversation. But even though Daniel dismissed her doubts, the seed of suspicion had already been planted, and it began to grow quietly in both homes. It was a bright afternoon in Victoria Island. The sun was hot, but a cool breeze moved across the football field of Ethan's international school. Students were shouting and running as they practiced for an upcoming inter-school competition. The green grass was neat and well trimmed. Parents were expected to attend the match the following week, and everyone wanted to perform well. Ethan was one of the strongest players on the team. He wore his school sports jersey with pride. Sweat covered his face as he ran across the field, chasing the ball. His teammates trusted him. Even though he had been moody in recent months, on the field he felt powerful and alive. "Pass the ball," one boy shouted. Ethan kicked the ball hard toward the goalpost. The crowd of students clapped and cheered. But just a few seconds later, something strange happened. Ethan felt dizzy. The fields began to spin around him. The noise of his teammates became distant. His chest felt tight and his legs suddenly felt weak. He tried to take another step, but his vision became blurry. Then, without warning, he collapsed on the grass. At first, some boys thought he was joking, but when he did not move, panic filled the field. "Ethan, Ethan!" his best friend shouted. The sports teacher ran quickly toward him. Ethan's eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow. "Call the school nurse," someone yelled. Within minutes, the nurse arrived and checked his pulse. Her face became serious. "We need to take him to the hospital immediately," she said. The school called Daniel and Victoria at once. Daniel left his office in Leki without finishing his meeting. Victoria dropped everything she was doing and rushed to the car. Their driver sped toward the private hospital in Victoria Island where Ethan had been taken. Inside the hospital emergency room, doctors and nurses surrounded Ethan. Machines were connected to his body. An oxygen mask covered his face. Victoria entered the room shaking. "My son," she cried, holding his hand. Daniel stood beside her, trying to remain strong. "Doctor, what is happening to him?" he asked urgently. The doctor, a serious-looking middle-aged man, spoke calmly. "He collapsed due to weakness. We are running some tests." Hours felt like days as they waited outside the emergency room. Finally, the doctor returned with test results in his hands. His expression was grave. "Your son has a serious blood condition," he said. "His body is not producing blood properly and he urgently needs a blood transfusion." Victoria felt her knees go weak. Daniel held her. "Take my blood," Daniel said immediately. "Do whatever you need." "Yes, take mine too," Victoria added without hesitation. The nurses quickly prepared both of them for blood testing to check compatibility. They believed everything would be fine. After all, they were his parents. They sat quietly while their blood samples were taken. Victoria whispered prayers under her breath. Daniel stared at the hospital wall, trying not to show fear. After some time, the doctor returned again. This time, his face looked even more serious. "There is a problem," he said slowly. Daniel stood up immediately. "What problem?" The doctor took a deep breath. "We tested both of your blood samples. Neither of you is a biological match for the boy." Victoria blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "For this type of condition, we expect at least one parent to be a match, but the results show no biological connection." Daniel's face changed. "That is impossible," he said firmly. "He is our son." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we repeated the test to be sure. The result is the same." Victoria felt her heart pounding loudly in her chest. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. Daniel's voice became louder. "Run the test again. Use another machine. Do whatever you need to do." The doctor nodded. "We will repeat the test immediately." More blood samples were taken. The hospital laboratory worked carefully. Minutes passed, then an hour. Victoria sat quietly, holding her handbag tightly. Her mind was racing. She remembered the small doubts she had pushed away for years. She remembered the whispers from relatives. She remembered staring at Ethan's face and feeling something was strange. Daniel walked back and forth in the hallway. He refused to believe what the doctor had said. Finally, the doctor returned for the third time. His face confirmed the truth before he even spoke. "We repeated the tests," he said gently. "There is no biological match." The words hung heavily in the air. Victoria felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the doctor as if he had not heard correctly. The hospital corridor became very quiet. The room became silent. The hospital corridor remained quiet after the doctor spoke those shocking words. Victoria felt like she could not breathe properly. Daniel stood stiff, his face hard and serious. "There must be a mistake," Victoria said again, shaking her head slowly. "This is not possible. I carried him in my womb. I gave birth to him. He is my son." The doctor spoke carefully. "Madam, we understand this is very difficult, but the blood tests are clear. There is no biological match between either of you and the boy." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Run it again," she said. "Check everything. You must have mixed up samples." Daniel stepped forward. "Doctor, I want a full DNA test done immediately. I want the best laboratory in Lagos to handle it. No errors." The doctor nodded. "We can arrange that today." Ethan was still lying weak in the hospital bed, unaware of the storm building around him. Nurses continued treating him while his parents waited for answers that could change their lives forever. Blood samples were taken from Ethan, Daniel, and Victoria again, this time for a DNA test. The samples were carefully labeled and sent to a trusted laboratory. Daniel made several phone calls to ensure the process would be fast and accurate. He did not want delays. He did not want excuses. Victoria sat beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand tightly. She watched his chest rise and fall slowly. She remembered the day she first held him as a baby. She remembered his first word, his first day at school, his birthdays. Every memory felt real. Every memory felt true. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. Daniel tried to stay strong, but inside him, fear was growing. He remembered small comments from family members over the years. He remembered Victoria once saying Ethan looked different. He had dismissed it quickly. Now those old conversations returned to his mind like echoes. 2 days later, the DNA results were ready. The doctor called them into his office. His face was serious and he spoke gently. "We have received the results," he said. Victoria held Daniel's hand tightly. "The DNA test confirms that neither of you is the biological parent of Ethan." The words hit them like thunder. Victoria felt her body go weak. She shook her head slowly. "No, no, no." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, anger filled his face. "How is that possible?" he demanded. "My wife delivered him in a hospital. I was there." The doctor spoke calmly. "There are only a few explanations. There could have been a baby swap at birth." Victoria gasped loudly. "A baby swap?" Her mind rushed back 15 years to the government hospital in Surulere. She remembered the rain. She remembered the crowded ward. She remembered nurses moving quickly. She remembered her baby being taken to the nursery. Daniel's voice became firm. "We need to check that hospital immediately." Victoria began to cry openly. "If Ethan is not our biological son, then where is our real child?" The thought broke her heart. Daniel hugged her, but his own mind was burning with questions. Someone had made a terrible mistake, or worse, someone had done something intentionally. He immediately contacted his lawyer. He demanded a full investigation into the hospital where Ethan was born 15 years ago. Within days, official letters were sent to the government hospital in Surulere. The management was shocked to receive the notice. They were told that serious legal action could follow if the truth was not uncovered. Old hospital records were brought out of storage rooms covered in dust. Files from 15 years ago were reopened. Nurses who had worked that night were contacted. Some had retired, some had moved to other cities, some still worked at the hospital. The hospital director felt nervous. A baby swap scandal could destroy their reputation. Daniel visited the hospital personally. He walked through the same corridors where he had once walked proudly with his newborn son. This time, he walked with anger in his steps. He demanded to see delivery records from that specific rainy night. The staff searched through old documents. Some papers were faded, some ink had almost disappeared. The rain that night had caused confusion. Many deliveries happened at the same time. Victoria also visited the hospital days later. She stood outside the nursery room staring at it quietly. Her heart was heavy. She tried to remember every detail from that night. She remembered being tired. She remembered trusting the nurses. She remembered seeing the gold bracelet on her baby's wrist before discharge. Suddenly, a small detail returned to her mind. She had not personally placed the hospital name tag on the baby. The nurse had done that. Daniel hired private investigators to look deeper. They checked the list of babies delivered that same night. They compared names and addresses. They looked for any unusual report or complaint filed years ago. Slowly, patterns began to appear. There were 4 baby boys delivered around the same time that night. One of them belonged to Victoria Williams. Another belonged to a young single mother named Emily Johnson from Ajigun. When investigators checked further, they noticed something strange. The blood group recorded in the old hospital file for Victoria's baby did not match Ethan's current blood group. That discovery made everything more serious. The hospital management grew worried. They knew something terrible had happened years ago. Whether it was an accident or something worse, the truth was beginning to rise. Victoria stayed awake many nights thinking about the possibility that her biological son was somewhere else in Lagos, growing up in another home, calling another mother, mother. The pain was unbearable. Daniel became more determined. "We will find him," he said firmly. And as more records were studied and more questions were asked, a terrible truth began to unfold. The investigation began quietly, but the tension inside the hospital was heavy. The management of the government hospital in Surulere knew that this matter could destroy their reputation. A baby swap case was serious. It could lead to lawsuits, arrests, and even closure of the hospital. The hospital director called an emergency meeting. Senior nurses, record officers, and administrative staff gathered in a small conference room. Old files were placed on the table. Everyone looked worried. "We need to know exactly what happened 15 years ago," the director said firmly. "Check every detail, no mistake." They started by identifying all the nurses and doctors who worked on the rainy night when Victoria delivered her baby. Some of them were still working at the hospital. Some had retired. Some had moved away from Lagos. Each nurse who was available was called in for questioning. One elderly nurse remembered that night clearly. "It was raining heavily," she said. "The power went off twice. We were very busy. Many women were in labor at the same time." Another nurse admitted that the nursery had been overcrowded. "We had 4 baby boys delivered within a short time. We labeled them quickly because we were rushing." The management checked the delivery register. The handwriting was faded, but still readable. They compared the time of birth, the mother's name, and the baby's details. Then they checked the blood group records. That was when they saw something strange. The blood group written beside Victoria Williams's baby did not match Ethan's blood group. At first, they thought it could be a recording error, but when they checked again, they noticed that another baby born that same night had a blood group that matched Ethan's. That baby belonged to Emily Johnson from Ajigun. The room became silent. "Are you saying the babies were switched?" one staff member asked quietly. The hospital director sighed deeply. "It is possible." They reviewed the nursery logbook. There was a small note written by a junior nurse from that night. It mentioned temporary confusion with baby tags because the power went off during labeling. That small detail raised serious concern. Daniel's lawyer pushed for DNA comparison between Ethan and the other babies born that night. Since most of those babies were now 15 years old, investigators had to track them down. The hospital contacted the families listed in the old records. Some families cooperated easily. Others were confused and afraid. Meanwhile, Daniel had also involved the police. He believed that if this was not an accident, then someone must be held responsible. Police officers visited the hospital and reviewed documents. They questioned staff members carefully. Some nurses became nervous. Some cried as they tried to remember events from 15 years ago. One nurse admitted something important. "That night, one young mother kept walking near the nursery," she said slowly. "She looked worried. I remember stepping out for a short time." "What was her name?" the officer asked. The nurse searched her memory. "I think Emily. Yes, Emily Johnson." That name immediately matched the hospital record. Police investigators looked deeper into Emily Johnson's file. She was 19 at the time, single, no family member listed as next of kin. Address, Ajigun. When they compared the possible blood group match, the connection became stronger. DNA comparison was the only way to confirm the truth. The police obtained permission to collect DNA samples from the other young men born that night. One by one, samples were taken and sent to the lab. Days passed with heavy tension. Finally, the lab results returned. The DNA comparison showed a strong match between Ethan Williams and Emily Johnson. It also suggested that Victoria Williams's biological son was most likely the child raised by Emily Johnson. The truth was getting closer. The police decided it was time to speak directly to Emily. 2 officers traveled to Ajigun one hot afternoon. The streets were busy with traders and children playing. The officers stopped in front of a small compound with old painted walls. They asked neighbors for directions. "Yes, Emily lives there," one woman said, pointing to a small door. Inside the small room, Emily was washing clothes in a bucket. Jaden was not home. He was at school. When she saw 2 police officers standing at her door, her heart skipped. "Are you Emily Johnson?" one officer asked calmly. "Yes," she replied, wiping her wet hands on her wrapper. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding the hospital where you gave birth 15 years ago." The mention of the hospital made her blood run cold. Her mind immediately traveled back to that rainy night in Surulere. Her hands began to shake slightly. "Is there a problem?" she asked, trying to sound normal. "It is just routine questioning," the officer replied. "Please cooperate." Neighbors began to stare as Emily followed the officers to their vehicle. Fear rose inside her chest. For 15 years, she had prayed this day would never come. Now, it was here. She was taken to the police station for questioning. The police station was quiet when Emily was brought into the small interview room. A single fan turned slowly above her head. Her hands were cold even though the afternoon was hot. Two officers sat across from her with a file on the table. "Emily Johnson," one officer began calmly. "We are investigating a possible baby swap that happened 15 years ago at the government hospital in Surulere." Emily forced herself to stay calm. "I don't understand," she said softly. The officer opened the file and placed some papers on the table. "DNA tests have been carried out. The results show that Ethan Williams, the boy raised by Daniel and Victoria Williams, is biologically connected to you." Emily felt her heart slam hard against her chest, but she shook her head quickly. "That is not possible," she said. "There must be a mistake." The second officer leaned forward. "We also tested the boy you are raising, Jaden Johnson. He is biologically connected to Victoria Williams." Emily's breathing became heavy, but she tried to control it. "No," she whispered. "That cannot be true." The officer slid the DNA result paper closer to her. "These tests were done twice, in 2 different laboratories. The results are clear." Emily stared at the paper, but the words became blurry through her tears. Her mind raced. For 15 years she had feared this moment. For 15 years she had prayed the truth would stay buried. "I gave birth to my son," she said weakly. "I took him home." "Did you enter the nursery that night?" the officer asked quietly. Emily hesitated. Her silence filled the room. Tears slowly rolled down her face. She covered her mouth with her hand as memories flooded back. The rain, the gold bracelet, her shaking fingers. "I was scared," she said suddenly. The officers waited. "I was young. I had nothing. No money, no support. The father left me. My parents rejected me," she continued, her voice breaking. "When I saw that rich couple, I saw their baby wearing a gold bracelet. I thought my child would suffer if he stayed with me." Her shoulders began to shake as she cried harder. "So you switched the babies?" the officer asked gently. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "I swapped them. I removed the tags. I changed them." The confession hung heavy in the air. "I did it because I was afraid," she cried. "I did not want my son to grow up in poverty. I thought I was saving him." The officers exchanged serious looks. They had suspected it, but hearing her admit it made everything real. Meanwhile, at their home in Leki, Victoria and Daniel were informed that Emily had confessed. Victoria felt her legs go weak. She sat down slowly on the sofa. "She admitted it?" she asked in disbelief. "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice hard with anger. "She did it on purpose." Victoria covered her face with both hands and cried deeply. For 15 years, she had raised a child who was not biologically hers. For 15 years, her real son had grown up somewhere else. "She stole my baby," she whispered painfully. Daniel's anger burned inside him. "She will face the law," he said firmly. "What she did destroyed our family." The story did not stay quiet for long. News reporters got information about the case. Within hours, headlines began to appear online. Lagos woman swaps babies at birth. 15 years later, DNA reveals truth. Social media exploded with comments. People shared the story across Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Some people blamed Emily completely. Others argued that the hospital was also responsible. Television stations began discussing the case. Talk shows invited lawyers and psychologists to speak about it. Everyone had an opinion. In Ajigun, neighbors gathered in front of Emily's house, whispering loudly, "I cannot believe she did that. She swapped babies. She has been living with someone else's child for 15 years. Emily stayed inside, crying and ashamed. She knew the whole city was now talking about her. In Leki, reporters stood outside Daniel's gate hoping for a statement. Security guards pushed them back. Inside the house, Victoria struggled to breathe properly. The pain was too much. She thought about her biological son growing up without knowing her. She thought about birthdays she missed, school events she never attended. Ethan, still recovering in the hospital, was finally told the truth by his parents. Daniel and Victoria sat beside his bed. Their faces were serious and tired. "There is something we need to tell you," Victoria said, her voice shaking. They explained the DNA results. They explained the investigation. They explained the baby swap. Ethan stared at them in shock. "So, you are not my real parents?" he asked slowly. Victoria cried immediately. "We raised you. We love you. Nothing changes that." But everything had already changed. Ethan felt confused and betrayed. His mind could not process it. Who was he? Where did he truly belong? At the same time, in Ajigun, Jaden returned from school to find neighbors whispering and staring at him. One friend showed him a news post on a phone. "Is this about you?" the friend asked. Jaden read the headline and felt his heart stop. He ran home quickly. "Mom, what is happening?" he demanded. Emily looked at him with swollen eyes from crying. She could not hide it anymore. She told him the truth. Jaden stood frozen as the words sank in. "So, I am not your biological son?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded through tears. "Yes, but I raised you. I love you. Please believe that." Jaden stepped back slowly, his world spinning. In one single day, everything changed. Two boys discovered they were living the wrong lives. Two families faced a truth buried 15 years, and nothing would ever be the same again. The truth did not settle quietly in the hearts of the two boys. It exploded like a bomb and left confusion everywhere. Ethan lay on his hospital bed staring at the ceiling long after his parents had finished explaining everything. His mind kept repeating the same words: "Swapped at birth, not your biological parents." For 15 years, he had lived in a big house in Leki, calling Daniel dad and Victoria mom. Now he was being told that another woman gave birth to him, a woman who lived in Ajigun, a woman who had switched him because of fear and poverty. He turned slowly and looked at Victoria. Her eyes were red from crying. "So, who am I?" he asked in a weak voice. The question broke her heart. "You are our son," she replied quickly. "We raised you." "But not by blood," Ethan said quietly. Daniel tried to sound strong. "Blood does not change the years we spent together." But Ethan felt something heavy inside his chest. He felt betrayed, not only by the woman who swapped him, but by life itself. He felt like his identity had been stolen. All the times he felt different suddenly made sense. The whispers from relatives, the comments about his looks, the strange feeling that he did not fully belong. Now he understood why. Meanwhile, in Ajegule, Jaden could not sleep that night. He sat outside the small house on a wooden bench, staring into the dark street. The air was warm and the noise of generators filled the compound. Emily had told him everything through tears. She had admitted what she did. She said she was afraid. She said she wanted her biological son to have a better life. Jaden felt confused and angry at the same time. "You lied to me for 15 years, he said earlier that evening. "I was protecting you," Emily had cried. "But you are not my biological mother," he replied. The words hurt both of them. Jaden loved Emily. She had suffered for him. She had worked hard to send him to school. She had stayed awake when he was sick. But now he did not know what to feel. If Victoria was his biological mother, then why did she not raise him? Why did he grow up in poverty while someone else lived in luxury? His identity felt broken. The next few days were heavy for both boys. Ethan returned home to the Williams mansion after leaving the hospital. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The swimming pool, the large living room, the quiet security guards, it all felt strange. He looked at his childhood pictures on the wall and wondered which life truly belonged to him. Jaden, on the other hand, walked through the crowded streets of Ajegule feeling like a stranger in his own neighborhood. People stared at him differently now. Some pitied him, some whispered. He began to wonder what his life would have been like if he had grown up in Leki. One afternoon, without telling his parents, Ethan asked the driver to drop him somewhere different. "Take me to Ajegule," he said quietly. The driver looked surprised but obeyed. Ethan wore simple clothes and a cap so that people would not recognize him from the news. As the car entered Ajegule, he stared at the narrow streets, the small shops, the children playing barefoot. This was the place where he was born. The car stopped near a small compound. Ethan stepped out slowly. His heart was beating fast. He knocked gently on the door. Emily opened it. For a moment, they both stared at each other in silence. She saw her biological son standing in front of her for the first time since he was a newborn baby. Ethan saw the woman who had given birth to him. Tears filled Emily's eyes immediately. "You have grown so big," she whispered. Ethan did not know what to say. Anger and curiosity mixed inside him. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "I was afraid," she replied. "I wanted you to have a better life." Ethan looked around the small room. The walls were old, the space was tight. "You decided my life without asking me," he said quietly. Emily lowered her head. At the same time, Jaden made his own decision. He took a bus to Leki. He had never entered such a rich area before. When he reached the tall gates of the Williams mansion, he felt nervous. He pressed the bell. A security guard opened the gate slowly and looked at him carefully. "I am Jaden. I need to see them." Inside the mansion, Victoria rushed to the door when she heard his name. When she saw him standing there, her breath stopped. She saw her own eyes looking back at her. Jaden also stared at her. She saw something familiar in her face. They stood in silence for seconds that felt long. "You are my biological mother," Jaden said softly. Victoria nodded slowly, tears running down her cheeks. She stepped forward and hugged him carefully, not knowing if she had the right. Jaden felt strange but did not pull away. Inside the mansion, he saw a life he had never known. Big rooms, beautiful furniture, quiet comfort. In Ajigun, Ethan saw struggle and hardship up close. Both boys felt torn between two worlds. Ethan realized that although he had grown up with comfort, something important had been hidden from him. Jaden realized that even though he had grown up in poverty, he had been loved deeply. Both boys slowly began to understand something important. Love is not only about blood. It is also about who stays, who sacrifices, and who raises you every day.
The story did not stay small. It did not remain only between the two families. Within days, it became national news across Nigeria. Television stations talked about it every evening. Radio presenters discussed it during morning shows. Newspapers printed the headline in bold letters. Social media was filled with arguments, anger, and shock. Baby swap scandal in Lagos. DNA reveals 15-year-old hospital mistake. People who did not know the families began to share their opinions online. Some blamed the hospital, some blamed Emily completely, some blamed the government. Everyone had something to say. Reporters stood outside the government hospital in Surulere every day. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward hospital staff. The hospital management released a public statement saying they were investigating the matter, but the damage had already been done. Parents who had given birth in that hospital years ago began to panic. Some demanded DNA tests for their own children. Some threatened to sue. The hospital's reputation fell quickly. Daniel Williams did not waste time. He hired strong lawyers. He filed a lawsuit against the hospital for negligence. He accused them of failing to protect newborn babies properly. He demanded compensation for emotional damage and trauma. "This is not just about money," Daniel said during a press interview. "This is about responsibility. For 15 years, my family lived a lie because of their carelessness." The lawsuit made the hospital even more nervous. Government officials became involved. Investigations grew deeper. Inside the Williams mansion in Leki, Victoria struggled emotionally. She stopped attending social events. She avoided phone calls from friends. She could not sleep well at night. Sometimes she sat alone in the living room, staring at nothing. She kept thinking about her biological son growing up in Ajigun without her. She imagined him walking to a public school while she was sending another child to an expensive private school. She felt robbed of precious years. At the same time, she also looked at Ethan and felt pain. She loved him deeply. She did not want him to feel rejected. Her heart felt divided into two. Daniel tried to stay strong for his family, but even he felt the pressure. Business partners asked questions. Friends called him privately to discuss the scandal. The family name was being talked about everywhere. In Ajigun, the situation was even harder for Emily. Before the scandal, she was just a quiet woman trying to survive. Now she was known across Lagos as the woman who swapped babies.
Neighbors gathered in small groups outside her house, whispering loudly so she could hear. How could she do such a thing? She stole someone's child. She is wicked. Some women refused to greet her anymore. Children pointed at her house and laughed. Market sellers talked about her openly when she passed by. One afternoon, as she went to buy tomatoes, a woman looked at her and said loudly, "That is the woman who changed babies because of money." Emily lowered her head and walked away quickly, tears burning in her eyes. She stopped going out often. She felt ashamed and exposed. Her small room in Ajigun became like a prison. She knew she had made a terrible mistake. She knew she had caused pain, but the insult still hurt deeply. The pressure was too much sometimes. She cried alone at night. She wondered if her decision had destroyed everything. But in the middle of the anger and insults, one person stood beside her, Jaden. When neighbors insulted her mother, Jaden spoke up. One evening, a group of men stood near their compound discussing the scandal loudly. "She should be in prison," one man said. "She ruined 2 families," another added. Jaden walked toward them calmly. "Please, stop talking about her like that," he said. The men looked at him. "She made a mistake," Jaden continued, his voice steady. "But she raised me. She worked hard for me. She suffered for me." One man laughed. "She lied to you for 15 years. Jaden nodded slowly. "Yes, she did. But she also loved me for 15 years. His words silenced them for a moment. At home, Emily heard what happened and cried again, but this time not only from pain. She felt grateful that Jaden still defended her. Even though he was hurt, he did not abandon her. Across Lagos, people continued debating the story. Some said poverty pushed Emily into a desperate act. Some said nothing could justify what she did. The hospital faced more legal threats. More families demanded answers. Television shows invited psychologists to talk about identity crisis in children. Lawyers discussed custody laws. Religious leaders spoke about forgiveness and consequences. The scandal refused to fade. 2 families were now connected by pain and public attention. Victoria struggled with emotional wounds that money could not heal. Emily carried the weight of shame in her community. Daniel fought legally against the hospital. And in the middle of it all, Jaden stood firm. "She made a mistake, but she raised me." The case finally reached the High Court in Lagos. News vans parked outside the courthouse early in the morning. Reporters stood with microphones waiting for the families to arrive. The baby swap scandal had already shaken the city, and now everyone wanted to see what the court would decide. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was serious and tense. The judge sat high above, watching carefully. Lawyers arranged their files and whispered to their clients. Members of the public filled the seats behind, hoping to witness history. Daniel and Victoria sat together on one side. Emily sat on the other side with her lawyer. Ethan and Jaden were present too. Both boys looked nervous but calm. This was not just a legal case, it was their lives. The judge cleared his throat and began the session. This court is here to determine the legal and emotional implications of a baby swap that occurred 15 years ago in a government hospital in Surulere. The first issue was custody. Should the boys return to their biological families? Daniel's lawyer stood up confidently. He explained how the hospital's negligence caused emotional trauma and confusion. He argued that biological connection was important and that the truth should not be ignored. "My client was denied the chance to raise his biological son," the lawyer said firmly. 15 years were taken away from him. Emily's lawyer responded calmly. He admitted that what Emily did was wrong, but he also reminded the court that she had raised Jaden with love and sacrifice. Removing the boys now would cause deeper emotional damage, he argued. They have grown up in their current homes. Those homes are all they know. The courtroom was silent as the lawyers continued to speak. They discussed legal rights, parental responsibility, and the best interest of the children. Then psychologists were called to testify. A child psychologist explained how identity confusion can affect teenagers. She spoke about emotional attachment. At this age, stability is very important, she said. Removing them from the only parents they have known could cause long-term trauma. Another expert spoke about the impact of sudden change. Biology matters, he said, but emotional bonding also matters. Love and daily care build strong psychological ties. The judge listened carefully, taking notes. Victoria wiped her eyes many times. She looked at Jaden across the room. She saw herself in his face. Her heart ached to bring him home, but she also feared hurting him more. Emily sat quietly, her hands shaking slightly. She knew she had no right to demand anything, but she feared losing Jaden completely. Daniel looked serious and focused. He wanted justice, but he also looked at Ethan and saw confusion in his son's eyes. Finally, the judge announced that he wanted to hear from the boys themselves. The courtroom became even silenter. Ethan was called first. He walked slowly to the witness stand. He looked at Daniel and Victoria before speaking. "Ethan," the judge said gently, "you are 15 years old. This court wants to know what you want. Do you wish to live with your biological mother, Emily Johnson?" Ethan swallowed hard. He thought about Ajigun. He thought about the small room. He thought about the woman who gave birth to him. He also thought about the house in Leki, the life he had always known. "I was shocked when I found out. I felt betrayed. I felt confused." The courtroom remained quiet. "But the people who raised me are my parents. They were there for me every day." He paused for a moment. "I want to stay with the parents who raised me." A soft murmur moved through the room. Victoria covered her mouth, tears falling freely. Next, Jaden was called. He stood confidently but respectfully. "Jaden," the judge said, "do you want to return to your biological parents?" Jaden looked at Victoria and Daniel. Then he looked at Emily. "I was angry when I found out. I felt like my life was a lie." His voice was steady. "But my mom raised me. She struggled for me. She worked hard for me." Emily began to cry quietly. Jaden continued, "I want to stay with the parents who raised me." The words echoed in the courtroom. Some people wiped their eyes. Even one of the lawyers adjusted his glasses to hide emotion. Both boys had chosen the same thing. The judge leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. The case was not simple. It involved law, emotion, biology, and morality. But one thing was clear. The boys had spoken from their hearts. The courtroom felt heavy with emotion. Two families waited for a decision that would shape their future. And in that moment, everyone understood that love and upbringing could not be easily separated from blood. The courtroom became emotional. The courtroom was silent as everyone waited for the judge to return with his final decision. The air felt heavy. Daniel held Victoria's hand tightly. Emily sat quietly, her head slightly bowed. Ethan and Jaden sat still, their hearts beating fast. After some minutes that felt like hours, the judge walked back into the courtroom. Everyone stood up. He sat down and looked at the two families carefully before speaking. "This case is painful and complicated," he began. "It involves mistakes, fear, negligence, and deep emotional bonds. The court has listened to the lawyers, the psychologists, and most importantly, the boys." He paused for a moment. "The court believes that the well-being of the children must come first." Victoria closed her eyes. Emily held her breath. "The boys will remain with the families who raised them," the judge said clearly. A soft sound moved through the courtroom. Victoria began to cry quietly. Emily also broke down in tears. Ethan lowered his head in relief. Jaden released a slow breath. But the judge was not finished. "However," he continued, "the biological connection cannot be ignored. Both families must allow reasonable access between the boys and their biological parents. They must build relationships in a healthy and supervised way." Daniel nodded slowly. He understood. "The legal documents will be adjusted, Birth records will reflect biological truths, but custody will remain with the current guardians. Both families are now permanently connected by this situation. The words settled deeply in everyone's heart. The gavel struck softly. The decision was final. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed to get reactions. Cameras flashed again. But inside the courtroom, something more important was happening. Victoria stood up slowly and looked at Jaden. She wanted to run and hug him, but she moved carefully. She did not want to pressure him. Jaden walked toward her on his own. For a few seconds, they stood face to face. "I don't know how to do this," Victoria said honestly, her voice soft. Jaden nodded. "I don't know either." She reached out and held his hand gently. It was a small step, but it meant something. Meanwhile, Emily looked at Ethan from across the room. He was speaking quietly with Daniel. She felt nervous. She did not know how to approach him. She had caused so much pain. After a moment, Ethan walked toward her. They stood in silence. "I don't hate you," Ethan said finally, though his voice was serious. "But it will take time." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I understand," she whispered. "I will wait." In the weeks that followed, life began to adjust slowly. Legal papers were processed. Birth certificates were updated to show biological truth. Lawyers finalized agreements about visitation and shared responsibilities. Everything was written clearly to avoid future confusion. The families were now connected in a way they never expected. Victoria started visiting Jaden carefully. The first time he came to the Williams mansion after the court decision, it felt less strange than before. She showed him old baby clothes she had kept. She showed him pictures from the day he was born, not knowing he was hers. Jaden listened quietly. He did not call her mom yet. That would take time, but he allowed her into his life slowly. Victoria also visited Ajigun for the first time properly. She sat inside Emily's small living room. The room was simple, but she saw how clean and organized it was. She saw school certificates on the wall with Jaden's name on them. "You raised him well," Victoria said softly. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. "I tried." On the other side, Emily tried to rebuild trust with Ethan. She did not want to push him too hard. She sent him small messages asking how he was feeling. Sometimes he replied, sometimes he did not. The first time Ethan visited her after the court decision, it was quieter than before. There was less anger in his eyes, but still confusion. She offered him food. He accepted politely. They talked about school. They talked about his health. "I cannot change the past," Emily said carefully, "but I want to be honest from now on." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "That is a start," he replied. Daniel also adjusted slowly. He was still angry about what had happened, but he focused on protecting his family and helping both boys move forward. Family dinners became different. Sometimes Jaden joined them in Leki. Sometimes Ethan visited Ajigun. It was awkward at first. Conversations were careful. Emotions were fragile. But slowly, something began to grow. Understanding. The boys continued school. They focused on their future. They still struggled with identity questions sometimes, but they also began to see that life had given them something unusual. They had two families now. Victoria learned patience. She stopped trying to force quick closeness. She listened more. She gave Jaden space to adjust. Emily learned humility. She accepted that rebuilding trust would take time. She stopped hiding from the world and started facing consequences with quiet strength. Healing did not happen overnight. There were still tears. There were still difficult conversations. There were still moments of silence. But there were also small smiles, careful hugs, honest talks. The families were permanently connected not only by law, but by shared history. And little by little, healing began slowly. Months passed after the court decision. The noise from the media slowly reduced. Reporters stopped standing outside the houses. Social media moved on to other trending stories. Life in Lagos continued with its usual rush of traffic, business, and daily struggle. Inside both families, things were still not perfect, but they were calmer. Ethan changed slowly. The anger that once lived close to the surface began to soften. He started attending counseling sessions arranged by his parents. At first, he did not want to talk much, but over time, he began to open up about his feelings. "I felt like my life was fake," he told the counselor one day, "like I did not know who I was." The counselor helped him understand that identity is not only about where you were born, but also about how you grow and who loves you. Ethan began to think deeply about that. At home in Leki, he stopped arguing so much. He spent more time talking calmly with Daniel. Sometimes they sat together by the pool in the evening without saying much. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Victoria also noticed the change in him. He smiled more often. He focused more on his schoolwork. His health improved after proper treatment for his blood condition. Slowly, he began to accept both sides of his story. He visited Emily sometimes, not with anger, but with curiosity. Their conversations were simple. They talked about small things, about his hobbies, about her work. Trust was not fully built yet, but it was growing slowly. In Ajigun, Jaden continued to excel in school. His teachers were proud of him. He won an academic award for being the best student in his class. His name was announced during assembly and the students clapped loudly. Victoria attended that ceremony quietly. She stood at the back, watching him receive his certificate. Her heart was full of pride and sadness at the same time. She wished she had been there for the earlier school events, but she was grateful she could attend this one. Jaden saw her in the crowd. He gave her a small nod and a soft smile. It was not dramatic, but it meant something. At home, Jaden still called Emily Mom. That had not changed, but he also allowed Victoria into his life little by little. Sometimes they spoke on the phone. Sometimes he visited Leki during weekends. He was learning that he could care for both women in different ways. One quiet afternoon, Victoria asked to meet Emily privately. They chose a small cafe in Surulere, not far from the hospital where everything began. The place was simple and calm. When they saw each other, there was no shouting, no anger, only a deep understanding of shared pain. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "If you could go back to that night," she asked softly, "would you still do it?" The question hung heavily in the air. Emily's eyes filled with tears immediately. She did not need time to think. "No," she answered through tears. "I was young. I was afraid. I thought poverty was worse than anything. I did not think about the future. I did not think about the pain it would cause." Victoria listened quietly. "I cannot change what I did," she continued. "If I could go back, I would hold my baby and face my struggle with courage. I would not steal another woman's child." Victoria wiped her own tears. For the first time, she saw not just the woman who swapped her baby, but a frightened 19-year-old girl who made a terrible decision out of fear. They did not become best friends. They did not forget the pain, but they reached a quiet understanding. Life continued. Ethan prepared for his final secondary school exams. Jaden began planning for university scholarships. Both boys carried a unique story that shaped them deeply. Sometimes, people in Lagos still talked about the scandal. "Do you remember the baby swap case?" someone would say in a bus. "Yes, the one from Surulere," another would reply. It became a story people used to warn others. Fear can push people into terrible decisions, but truth always comes out, no matter how long it hides. One decision made in a moment of panic changed many lives. It changed 2 families. It changed 2 boys. It changed how a hospital operated. It changed how people thought about trust. On some rainy nights in Lagos, when thunder rolls across the sky, Victoria sometimes remembers the night she gave birth. Emily also remembers that same rain. 15 years passed before the truth came out. But when it did, it changed everything forever. And in Lagos, people still remember the rainy night when 2 babies were swapped, and how 15 years later, the truth finally came out. No matter how hard life becomes or how afraid you feel, never make a decision out of fear or desperation, because one wrong choice made in a single moment can follow you for years, hurt innocent people, destroy trust, and change many lives forever. But honesty, courage, and patience will always lead to a better ending than lies ever can. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful African stories that teach real-life truths. Thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel.